He was a veteran Navy SEAL who survived war. But the moment that haunted him most was not a battlefield. On a frozen lake, his dog stopped, not barking, not pulling, just refusing to move. Years ago, he ignored a K9's warning, and men died. Since then, he feared the moment of decision more than danger itself. This time, the world looked calm. Lights, laughter, a winter festival, but something unseen was already closing in. A woman carried a secret. A child almost vanished. And one loyal dog stood between truth and silence. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to like and subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Legends. The ice did not creak. That was the first thing Miles Kellen noticed. Before the cold, before the light, before the dog. The lake lay frozen beneath the morning sun, smooth and pale, stretched wide like a sheet of glass no one had dared to touch. Snow reflected the sky so fiercely it hurt to look at for too long. The world felt clean in that way winter sometimes lied about. Bright, orderly, harmless. Miles was moving fast when it happened. Not running, never running, just the steady, ground-eating stride of a man whose body remembered how to cover distance without wasting energy. His boots bit into the packed snow along the narrow lakeside road outside Silver Pine, a quiet northern town tucked between pine forest and frozen water. Every breath came out white, every sound carried. At the end of a short lead walked Rook. The German shepherd was 5 years old, black and tan, his coat thick and close to the body. Built for cold like this, he moved with disciplined economy, head low, tail level, shoulders rolling smoothly beneath muscle trained by repetition rather than play. One ear tipped slightly at the end, a faint scar visible beneath the fur on his shoulder when the light caught it just right. Not decorative, not accidental. A working dog's history written in small, permanent marks. Rook had been trained not to pull unless necessary, and Miles had trained himself to trust that, so when the dog stopped, it was wrong enough to register before thought. No bark, no growl, no tension on the leash. Just a full stop, sudden, absolute. Rook's body locked in place, weight settling evenly through his paws, as if the ground itself had commanded him to stay. His ears lifted, his eyes fixed forward, unblinking, focused not on the road, but the shoreline just beyond it, where ice met reeds and shadow gathered under a thin line of trees. Miles reacted without thinking. His hand closed around the leash and pulled back, harder than he meant to. The motion surprised him, as much as it surprised the dog. Miles almost never did that. Rook turned his head slightly, amber eyes flicking back for half a second. Not confused, not defiant, just checking, as if to say, I know, but I'm not moving. Miles's chest tightened. No, he muttered under his breath, voice low, roughened by the cold. Not again. He forced himself to breathe in through his nose, slow and controlled, the way he'd been taught long before Alaska, long before the quiet, the way you breathed when hesitation could get someone killed. Miles Kellen was 28 years old, but the lines carved into his face made him look older when he wasn't smiling, which was most of the time. His features were sharp and angular, jaw set hard beneath a shadow of stubble he never bothered to shave unless required. His eyes were a pale gray blue, the kind that didn't offer much even when they were paying attention. Especially then. He wore a digital camouflage uniform, the kind that blended easily into forest and snow, clean but worn in the places that mattered. Brown combat boots. No visible insignia except a small, subdued Navy SEAL patch stitched into the fabric, easy to miss unless you knew what to look for. He'd left the teams early. That was the polite phrasing. The one used on paperwork. Early separation. The truth was messier. Miles stared past Rook now, eyes scanning the shoreline with the slow precision of habit. There was nothing obvious to see. No broken ice, no vehicle tracks, no movement. Just frozen water and winter light and a thin wind brushing across the lake's surface. Then the wind shifted. It came off the water, colder, sharper. Miles inhaled again, and this time, something threaded through the clean smell of snow and pine. Metal. Faint. Almost imagined. Like cold steel left too long in the open. Rook's tail lowered by an inch. Miles swallowed. "Don't make me choose," he thought, the words unformed but heavy in his chest, not like that. He remembered another stop, another dog, another place where the ground had felt solid until it wasn't. That dog had hesitated. Miles hadn't. 2 men hadn't come home. The leash felt heavier in his hand now, like an accusation. "Easy," he murmured. Not to the dog, but to himself. "Easy." Rook did not move. The road behind them was empty. Silver pine lay a mile back, still asleep, smoke just beginning to curl from chimneys. Ahead, the lake stretched on, indifferent and silent. Miles stood there, caught between muscle memory and fear he didn't like to name. That was when Rook did something he had never done before. The dog shifted, not forward, not back, but sideways, placing his body slightly in front of Miles's leg. A subtle movement, protective, blocking. Miles's pulse jumped. "What are you doing?" he whispered. Rook's ears twitched. His gaze never left the shoreline. A ripple passed through Miles that had nothing to do with the cold. The sound came, then, so faint Miles almost missed it. Not a voice, not a shout. Just a thin, irregular tapping. Metal on ice, far away, carried on the wind like a mistake. Once, then again. Rook's body went taut. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not a growl, but something closer to recognition. His nostrils flared. His head dipped, tracking the sound with a precision that made Miles's skin prickle. Miles's training screamed false alarm. Ice shifted. Debris moved. Wind played tricks. But another part of him, the part that had learned too late that instinct could be data, tightened its grip. "Rook," he said quietly. The dog did not advance. He did not retreat. He stayed. The tapping came once more, then stopped. The silence that followed felt deliberate. Miles became suddenly aware of how bright the world was, how exposed, how the lake offered nowhere to hide anything that didn't want to be found. He crouched slightly, lowering his center of gravity, eyes never leaving the ice, his hand loosened on the leash. For the first time in years, he considered doing nothing. The thought scared him more than action ever had. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay." Rook leaned forward just enough for Miles to feel the shift through the line. Permission, not movement. Miles did not give the command. Seconds stretched. The wind cut across the lake again, colder now, carrying with it something else. Sharp, chemical, wrong. Miles's jaw tightened. Metal, fuel, fear. He straightened slowly, heart pounding in a rhythm that felt too loud in the open air. Whatever was out there had not meant to be seen. Whatever it was, Rook had already decided. Miles closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them again. He neither pulled the leash nor let it go slack. He stood, between forward and back, between trust and doubt, between a dog who would not move, and a man who was no longer sure he should. The lake remained silent. Rook remained still. And Miles Kellen did not give the same order. Avery Knox did not step into the light. She stayed where the trees bent low near the shoreline, half hidden behind a bank of snow and frozen reeds, her silhouette broken by branches and shadow. The winter sun caught the ice behind her, turning the lake into a field of white glare. But where she stood, the light thinned, softened, enough to hide a person who had learned how to disappear without running. Miles noticed her only after Rook did. The dog's body shifted, not forward this time, but angled, subtle, deliberate. His head turned slightly to the left, ears lifting in a way that had nothing to do with curiosity. This wasn't pursuit. It was acknowledgement. Someone was already there. Miles slowed his breathing. His hand loosened on the leash, fingers flexing once as he adjusted his stance. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for anything that might look like a weapon. "Show yourself," he said calmly. The woman hesitated. Then she stepped out. She was in her early 30s, maybe 32. Her build lean and practical rather than delicate. Not tall, but steady on her feet despite the uneven ground. Her face was pale from the cold, lips tinged faintly blue. But her eyes were sharp, gray-green, alert, tracking Miles the way someone trained to read people did under pressure. Her hair, a muted auburn brown, was pulled into a low, loose knot at the base of her neck, strands escaping to cling to her cheeks where frost had settled. She wore a dark rescue jacket, the kind designed for wind and exposure, its reflective strips dulled with wear. One sleeve was torn near the elbow, the fabric stiff where water had frozen and refrozen. She looked hurt, but not broken. "My name is Avery," she said. Her voice was quiet, controlled, and carried just enough hoarseness to suggest cold rather than fear. "Avery Knox." She kept her hands visible as she spoke, not raised, just open. Miles did not answer immediately. He took her in piece by piece, the careful posture, the way she favored her right side slightly, the faint tremor in her fingers she was clearly trying to suppress. He had seen this before. Not in victims who had just survived an accident. In people who had survived something else. "You're bleeding," he said at last. Avery glanced down at her sleeve as if noticing it for the first time. "It's old," she replied, "from last night." Rook took one step forward, not toward her, between them. The movement was small but unmistakable. His shoulder lined up with Miles's thigh, his body forming a quiet barrier. He did not bare his teeth. He did not lower his head. He simply placed himself there. Avery's gaze dropped to the dog. For the first time since she'd stepped into view, something shifted in her expression. Recognition. Not relief, not surprise. Something closer to confirmation. "That's him," she murmured, almost to herself. "The same one." Miles felt his spine tighten. "The same one as what?" he asked. Avery looked back up at him. Her eyes held his, steady and unflinching. "The dog," she said. "Yesterday morning. He stood in that exact spot." Miles said nothing. He waited. Avery exhaled slowly, the breath fogging in the cold air. "I didn't die out there," she continued, "if that's what you're wondering. The ice didn't give way completely. The car stopped just enough for me to crawl out." She paused, watching his face carefully, as if gauging how much he would believe. "I stayed because I had nowhere else to go." Miles crossed his arms, not defensively, but in a way that anchored him. "You're telling me you survived a crash on the lake," he said, "and instead of going into town, you hid in the woods overnight." "Yes," Why? Avery hesitated. That was answer enough. Rook's ears twitched. His tail lowered another fraction, his body tension increasing in a way Miles recognized immediately. Not aggression, alertness. She was followed, Miles said quietly. Avery's eyes flicked to the dog again. This time she didn't hide it. Yes, she said. I was. Miles's gaze sharpened. By who? I don't know his name, Avery replied. But I know his face, and I know how patient he is. She took a careful step closer, stopping well short of Rook's space. I didn't call for help because I couldn't, she went on. No signal. And because the last time I reported something, the report disappeared. Miles studied her for a long moment. You're a medic, he said. Avery nodded once. Flight medic, air rescue. That explained the jacket, the posture, the way she'd assessed him the second she'd stepped into view. And you just happened to be driving along the lake at night? Miles asked. Avery's jaw tightened. No. She reached into the inner pocket of her jacket slowly, deliberately. Miles's muscles tensed despite himself. She pulled out nothing more dangerous than a folded strip of laminated plastic, creased, worn, the edges frayed. An ID badge. Her photo stared back at him, hair pulled tighter, eyes tired but resolute. Her name printed cleanly beneath. I was coming back from a pickup, she said. A routine transfer. Or at least, that's what it was supposed to be. Miles handed the badge back, and it wasn't. Avery shook her head. No. She looked past him now, toward the frozen lake. The brightness there seemed to hurt her eyes. They've been using routes like this, she said. Quiet ones, places where people don't look too hard. I noticed things that didn't line up. Flight logs, patient numbers, weights that didn't make sense. Miles felt something cold settle in his stomach. And you decided to investigate alone, he said. I didn't decide, Avery replied softly. I noticed. And once you notice, you don't get to unsee it. Rook shifted again, stepping forward just enough to place his body squarely between Miles and Avery now. The leash went slack in Miles's hand. Avery noticed. Her breath caught, not in fear, but in something else. Awe, maybe, or belief. He's choosing, she said. Miles's eyes snapped back to the dog. Rook, he murmured. The German shepherd did not look at him. Avery crouched slowly, carefully, lowering herself to one knee in the snow a few feet away from Rook. She didn't reach out, didn't test his space. She simply stayed there. I didn't know why he stopped yesterday, she said, her voice barely louder than the wind. I thought it was coincidence. But when I saw him again today, her throat tightened. She swallowed. I don't think he stopped because of the ice, she finished. I think he stopped because of me. Rook's ears angled forward. For the first time since she'd appeared, his gaze shifted, briefly, to Avery's face. Miles felt the moment land like a weight, not proof, not evidence, but something harder to shake. Avery rose again, slower now. If you're going to turn me in, she said, do it now. But if you walk away, she met his eyes. They'll find me. Miles stared at her. He saw the calculation there, the fear held under discipline, the resolve of someone who had already made a choice and paid for it once. You're asking me to trust you, he said. No, Avery replied. I'm asking you to trust your dog. The words hung between them. Rook took another step forward, not toward Avery, toward the lake. Miles closed his eyes for a brief, dangerous second. When he opened them, he was no longer looking at the past. He was looking at a woman who hadn't died when she was supposed to. at a dog who refused to move on, at a choice that was already taking shape, whether he wanted it or not. "All right," Miles said quietly. Avery's breath caught. "Talk," he continued. "But start from the part you don't want to. Say out loud." The wind swept across the frozen lake again, cold and relentless. Behind them, the town of Silver Pine remained unaware. And in front of them, the truth waited, unfinished. They left the shoreline before the light began to fade. Miles took them inland, away from the open lake and into a narrow band of forest, where spruce and birch grew close enough to break the wind. Snow lay deeper here, undisturbed, swallowing sound. The path was not a trail so much as a memory of one, something used often enough to exist, rarely enough to stay invisible. Rook moved ahead, leash loose, his gait returning to its steady, economical rhythm. Whatever had held him at the lake was behind them now, for the moment. Avery followed a few steps back, her breathing controlled, boots careful where the ground dipped and rose beneath the snow. She moved like someone used to unstable terrain, hips loose, shoulders balanced, weight always ready to shift. When she stumbled once, she recovered without comment, jaw set, eyes forward. Miles watched her from the corner of his eye. She hadn't asked where they were going. That alone told him more than any explanation could. They reached a shallow clearing where the trees opened just enough to let pale sunlight spill through. A fallen log lay half buried in snow, its surface worn smooth by years of weather. Miles stopped there, unclipped the leash, and let Rook circle once before settling near his boots. The dog sat, alert but calm, amber eyes scanning the tree line as if cataloging distances only he understood. Miles shrugged off his pack and set it down. His movements were precise, automatic. He did not rush. "All right," he said at last. "This is far enough." Avery nodded. She leaned against a tree, easing pressure off her right side. Her face was drawn now, color drained by cold and fatigue she had been holding at bay since the night before. "You said you wanted me to start from the part I don't want to say out loud," she said. Miles met her gaze. "I did." She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet." That surprised him. Instead, she gestured toward the log. "Sit," she said. "If you're going to tell me why you looked like that when he stopped." Miles didn't answer right away. Rook's ears flicked. He looked up at Miles, head tilted slightly, the faint scar on his shoulder catching the light. 5 years old. Old enough to have learned restraint the hard way. Miles exhaled through his nose and sat. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then Miles said, "I was 19 the first time a dog saved my life." Avery went still. "It was my first deployment with the teams," he continued. "Different dog, same breed, same posture when he caught a scent that didn't belong." His voice stayed level, but something beneath it tightened like a wire drawn too thin. "We were moving through a compound," he said. "Night, dust, heat." The dog stopped. He paused. "Exactly like Rook did yesterday." Avery waited. The handler hesitated, Miles went on. "Just for a second." He looked back at me. I was point. Rook shifted, lowering himself into a sphinx-like crouch, forelegs extended, chin hovering just above the snow. "I gave the order," Miles said. "I told them to move." The words landed heavily between them. "There was nothing visible," he continued. "No wires, no pressure plates. No intel suggesting anything ahead." His jaw tightened. The device was buried, deep, designed to trigger after movement. Delayed detonation. Avery's fingers curled against the bark behind her. "It went off behind us," Miles said quietly. 2 men. One of them, the handler. He swallowed once, hard. I didn't even hear it at first, he added. Just felt the ground lift. Silence settled again, thicker now. Rook did not look away. That's why you left, Avery said. Miles shook his head. No, that's why I stayed too long. He leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. I kept telling myself it was bad luck. That dogs aren't infallible. That instinct is just pattern recognition with better PR. A humorless breath escaped him. But every time a dog hesitated after that, my chest locked up. I couldn't tell if I was reading the situation or just hearing ghosts. Avery studied him, her expression softening in a way that wasn't pity. You don't trust yourself anymore, she said. Miles nodded once. I trust the dog, he said. I trust the data he can't explain. But when it comes time to choose, when someone's life is on the other side of that call, I don't know if I'm making a decision or paying for a mistake. Rook rose, crossed the short distance, and sat directly in front of Miles. Close enough that their knees nearly touched, Miles's hand lifted without thought, resting briefly on the dog's neck. The warmth grounded him. Avery watched the exchange, something unreadable passing behind her eyes. You're not the only one who made the wrong call once, she said quietly. Miles looked up. She straightened from the tree, wincing as she did, then pushed through it. I told you I noticed things that didn't line up, she said. What I didn't tell you is when. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small folded scrap of paper. Not an ID this time, something older, creased to softness. A flight manifest, she said. 3 months ago. Miles took it, scanning the lines, numbers, codes, a route that looped unnecessarily far north before cutting inland. You signed off, he said. Yes, Avery replied. Because it looked clean. Because the supervisor who approved it had pulled me out of a wreck once, years ago. Her voice tightened. He carried me 300 yards through smoke, held pressure on my leg until help came. I trusted him. Miles looked up. And now? Avery's gaze drifted back toward the direction of the lake. Now I don't know where trust ends and obligation begins. She took a breath. The night my car went through the ice, the man who followed me didn't rush. He waited. He made sure I saw his face. Miles's stomach sank. Because he wanted you to recognize him, he said. Avery nodded. Because he wanted me to remember who I owed. Rook's ears pricked sharply. Miles felt it then, the shift. The quiet click in his mind when scattered pieces aligned into something dangerous. You said he saved your life, he said. Yes. And now he wants you back, Miles said. Yes. Avery met his eyes. Because he believes that once I chose him over the truth. Rook stood abruptly, not tense, not alarmed. He turned away from both of them and walked to the edge of the clearing, nose low, tracing an invisible line through the snow. He stopped near a patch of ground where the snow lay thinner, disturbed by footprints already softening in the sun. He sniffed once, then he sat. Miles rose instantly, heart pounding. He crossed to the spot, crouched, and brushed snow aside with his glove. Boot prints, fresh, leading away from the clearing. Avery's breath hitched. He's been here, she whispered. Miles followed the tracks with his eyes until they vanished between the trees. His pulse slowed, not with relief, but resolve. No, he said. He wanted you to know he could be. Rook looked back at him, eyes steady. The dog had not barked. He had not chased. He had marked the boundary. Miles straightened, cold clarity settling over him. "I left the teams because I stopped trusting my judgment," he said. "I stayed alive because dogs like him didn't." Avery stepped closer now, no longer keeping distance. "And now?" Miles looked at Rook, then at the forest. "Now I decide what an order means," he said. Avery's voice was quiet. "If you help me, you don't get to walk away after?" Miles nodded. "I know." She hesitated, then said the things she had been holding back since the lake. "The man who saved my life," she said, "taught me how to stay calm in a crisis." Her eyes hardened. "The man who followed me onto the ice taught me how patient he is." Rook moved back to Miles's side, close but not touching. Miles reached down, clipped the leash on, not to restrain, but to connect. "All right," he said. The forest closed in around them, silent and watchful. And somewhere beyond the trees, a line had already been crossed. They moved deeper into the trees as afternoon thinned toward evening. Miles chose a line that cut away from the clearing and the tracks Rook had marked earlier, following a shallow ridge where the ground rose just enough to drain meltwater and keep their footprints light. Snow creaked under boots in the way it only did when the temperature hovered near decision. Cold enough to preserve, warm enough to betray. Rook led with quiet assurance, 5 years old and steady as a metronome, his black and tan coat darkening where snow clung and melted along his shoulders. He paused often, not to stop them, but to sample the air. Each time he moved on again, confident, as if confirming a conclusion he had already reached. Avery walked beside Miles now, close enough that their elbows nearly brushed. She had stopped favoring her side, but the strain showed in the set of her jaw and the way she counted her breaths when the ground pitched unexpectedly. The forest dulled sound and sharpened thought. It was a place where memory came uninvited. They reached a low stand of spruce and found shelter beneath interlocking branches. Miles cleared a space with quick, economical movements. He didn't light a fire. He didn't need warmth. He needed clarity. Avery watched him with the same professional attention she used on patients, reading posture, micro-movements, the places tension hid. When he finished, she sat on her heels and pulled her jacket tighter. "This is the part," she said, "where people usually tell me to start from the beginning." Miles looked at her. "I don't need a beginning. I need the truth." She nodded once. "Then I'll give it to you, without decoration." Avery Knox had the look of someone who had been strong long before she learned how to be careful. Her face carried lines earned by wind and sleepless shifts, not age. There was a steadiness to her eyes that came from making decisions under pressure, decisions measured in seconds, not ideals. "I signed off on flights I shouldn't have," she said. The words landed without drama. "I didn't know what they were moving," she continued. "Not at first." It was presented as overflow. Remote transfers. People without documentation because their lives had already fallen through the cracks. Miles stayed silent. "I noticed inconsistencies," Avery said. "Weights that didn't match manifests. Med kits stocked with supplies no emergency transport would carry. Routes that looped too far north, then doubled back inland." She drew a slow breath. "I questioned one of them. The answer came back clean. Too clean." Rook lay down, chin on his paws, eyes still alert. "I told myself I was being paranoid," Avery went on. "I told myself my job was to keep people alive, not audit logistics." Her mouth tightened. "And because the person who approved those flights had saved my life once." Miles felt the word "saved" tilt the room. "Grant Halverson," Avery said. She didn't look away when she spoke his name. "He was our regional logistics supervisor," she explained. Mid-40s, tall, broad shoulders without bulk, always dressed like he belonged in an office but could walk through a storm without flinching. She closed her eyes for a moment, summoning the image. Square jaw, short beard kept precise, hair dark with gray threaded through it, combed back like order mattered to him. He had a voice people trusted, calm, measured, never wasted. Miles pictured him easily. Men like that wore authority the way others wore coats. 5 years ago, Avery said, a medevac went down in a warehouse fire. Smoke everywhere. No visibility. I broke my leg getting a patient out. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her jacket. Grant went in after me, carried me out, stayed with me until another team arrived. She opened her eyes. When someone does that for you, you don't question them lightly. Miles nodded. Gratitude could be a leash if you let it. So when I signed the manifest, Avery said, I told myself I was honoring a debt. Her voice didn't waver, but something behind it did. There was one flight, she continued. 3 months ago, a child was listed, age 6, no name, just a code. Miles's breath slowed. The manifest said the patient was transferred, Avery said. No follow-up, no receiving hospital. I asked. She swallowed. Grant told me it was classified. He told me the child was safe. He told me not to dig. And you didn't, Miles said. I didn't, she replied, because if I did, I would have had to admit what I already suspected. Silence pressed in. I started collecting evidence after that, Avery said. Quietly, copies of manifests, body cam footage from helipad crews, anything that didn't make sense. Miles watched her hands. They were steady now, but there was a tremor waiting beneath the surface. The night my car went on to the ice, Avery said. I was on my way to hand those files to someone else. Someone I thought could help. Rook's head lifted. The person who followed you, Miles said. Yes, Avery replied. Grant. Miles felt the last piece click into place. He didn't want to kill you, he said. He wanted you to remember who gave you permission to be quiet. Avery nodded. And who could give it again? She reached into her pack and pulled out her jacket, laying it across her knees. As she did, a faint, sharp scent cut through the cold air. Rook's head snapped up. He rose slowly, hackles lifting just enough to ripple his coat. A low sound vibrated in his chest, not a growl, but a warning shaped by restraint. Miles's eyes narrowed. What? He murmured. Avery froze. What is it? Rook stepped closer to the jacket, nose working, then stopped short. He did not touch it. He did not retreat. He gurgled softly, something between a growl and a memory. Miles knelt, careful, and took the jacket from Avery. He lifted it, sniffed. Nothing obvious. Rook's reaction didn't change. Avery's face drained of color. He touched that jacket, she said. That night. Miles looked up. Grant, Avery clarified. He put it around my shoulders after pulling me out of the car. Said I was shaking. The weight of it settled. Rook turned his head away from the jacket and looked at Avery. Not aggressively, not accusing, as if asking a question. Avery met his gaze, and something in her broke. I knew, she said suddenly. I knew enough to stop it. Miles stiffened. I didn't know everything, she rushed on, but I knew people weren't ending up where the paperwork said they were. I knew because I stopped seeing names. Her breath hitched. I chose to believe Grant because believing him meant I didn't have to choose. Rook sat. Avery covered her face with one hand, then dropped it again. If I go back, she said quietly, he'll expect me to fall in line, to sign, to say nothing. Miles felt the truth of it like a bruise. "And if you don't?" he said. "They won't stop looking," Avery replied. The forest seemed to lean in. Miles stood, folding the jacket carefully and placing it back into Avery's pack. "He wants control," he said, "not silence." Avery nodded. "He believes loyalty is permanent." Rook returned to Miles's side, pressing close enough that their shoulders touched. The dog's warmth was steady, grounding. Miles exhaled. "Then we don't disappear," he said. "We don't run." Avery looked at him, searching. "You're not law enforcement anymore?" "No," Miles said. "But I know how systems break." He met her gaze. "And how they pretend they don't." Avery straightened, resolve tightening her features. "If I go back," she said, "it has to look like I chose him." Miles considered that. The risk. The cost. Rook's tail thumped once against the snow. Miles nodded. "Then we make sure he believes it." The light was fading now, shadows stretching between trees. Somewhere beyond the forest, a man who believed gratitude could be weaponized waited patiently. And Avery Knox understood, at last, what her silence had bought. The cabin did not look disturbed. That was what unsettled Miles first. Snow lay smooth around the structure, unbroken except for the narrow path he and Rook had cut earlier in the day. The roof sagged slightly under winter's weight, smokeless and silent, just as he had left it. The windows reflected the trees and the fading sky without giving anything away. Nothing obvious was wrong. Miles stopped 20 yards out, lifting a closed fist. Rook halted instantly at his side, body aligned, muscles coiled but contained. The German shepherd's black and tan coat blended into the shadowed snow, his breath steady, his eyes already scanning the cabin's perimeter. 5 years of canine work had taught him a specific kind of patience, the kind that waited not for movement, but for intent. Avery stood just behind them, her shoulders tight beneath her rescue jacket. The fatigue she'd been pushing down all day had begun to surface, but her eyes were sharp now, alert to every detail. Miles crouched and examined the snow. "There," he murmured. "Tire tracks. Not fresh enough to glisten, not old enough to be buried." They curved off the narrow access road, stopped short of the cabin, then turned away again. Whoever had driven them hadn't lingered. No door prints, no footfalls toward the porch. A look and leave. Avery felt the meaning of it before Miles said anything. "He doesn't need to come inside," she whispered. "He just needs me to know he can." Miles nodded. That kind of presence wasn't about violence. It was about pressure. They approached the cabin slowly. Miles unlocked the door, stepped inside first, sweeping the space with a practiced eye. Nothing missing, nothing moved, no forced entry. Rook followed, then stopped just inside the doorway. He did not cross the threshold. The dog stood rigid, head low, eyes fixed on the darkened interior, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Avery swallowed. "What is he doing?" Miles didn't answer right away. Rook's tail was still. His ears were forward. He wasn't detecting an intruder, not yet. This was something else. "He's blocking," Miles said quietly. "Not reacting." Rook shifted his weight, placing his body squarely between the open door and the interior of the cabin. A controlled, deliberate posture. The kind he used when a threat existed, but had not committed. Avery felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "He's not here," she said. "No," Miles replied. "But he wants us to think he might be." Miles closed the door gently behind them. The click of the latch sounded too loud in the quiet room. The cabin was small, One main room, a cot by the wall, a compact stove, a narrow table. Miles moved through it with ease, every object in its expected place. A life stripped down to what was necessary. Avery set her pack down and leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. "He's waiting," she said. "That's what this is." Miles glanced at her. "Waiting for what?" "For me to decide," Avery replied. "Disappear or come back." Miles studied her face, the tension around her mouth, the way her eyes flicked unconsciously toward the window, toward the road. "He doesn't want you dead," Miles said. "Dead people can't be controlled." Avery's jaw clenched. "He thinks I'll choose the easier path." Miles said nothing. Rook finally stepped forward, entering the room. He moved directly to the window facing the access road and sat, gaze fixed outward, unblinking, as if standing watch. They didn't stay long. Miles knew better than to linger in a place that had already been measured. He packed quickly, movements efficient, silent. Avery followed his lead, saying little, but watching everything. They left the cabin through the back, disappearing into the trees before full darkness settled. Snow began to fall again, light at first, then thicker. Nature's way of erasing questions. They walked for nearly an hour before stopping near a ridge that overlooked a stretch of frozen service road. From there, they could see faint tracks in the snow below, vehicles moving between the town and the industrial outskirts near the water. Miles knelt, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. He didn't write names, just patterns, times, distances. Avery watched him. "You're not planning to hide anymore." "No," Miles said. "I'm planning to understand." She hesitated. "You could still walk away." Miles looked up at her. "So could you." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "I tried." They worked in silence, tracking routes over the next hours, where trucks slowed, where they didn't stop. Which roads were plowed first after snowfall. Avery pointed out schedules she recognized from flight logs. Miles marked intersections that created blind spots. Rook ranged ahead, nose low, occasionally pausing to confirm a scent before moving on again. He did not chase. He did not alert. He was mapping. By the time the sky deepened to indigo, the picture had begun to form. "This road," Avery said, pointing to a narrow spur that cut toward the docks. "It shouldn't be this busy." Miles nodded. "It leads to cold storage." "Fish processing," Avery added. "Seasonal, low oversight." Miles felt the implications settle. "Refrigerated space, transport access, legitimate cover." "And rescue branding," Avery said quietly. "No one questions trucks marked with aid logos." They followed the spur road until the smell changed. Diesel, brine, cleaners strong enough to sting the back of the throat. A cluster of low buildings crouched against the rock near the shoreline, metal-sided, unremarkable, their lights dimmed. A sign near the fence read, "Northern Relief Co-op." Avery's breath caught. That's not a real organization. Miles studied the perimeter. Cameras placed too high to be decorative. A chain-link fence patched in, places that suggested frequent access, not neglect. Rook stopped. He did not growl. He sat. Miles felt it again. That internal tightening, the moment when instinct and analysis converged. "This is it," Avery whispered. Miles didn't answer. He was watching the lights, counting intervals. A truck rolled through the gate below them. White, clean, marked with a medical transport emblem that looked legitimate enough at a glance. Rook rose silently, ears pricked, body angled toward the vehicle. Then he did something unexpected. He turned away from the truck, walked 3 steps back toward the trees, and sat. Miles frowned. That's not... He followed Rook's gaze. Another vehicle idled farther down the road, lights off, engine low. Waiting. Avery's stomach dropped. That's the escort. Miles understood immediately. The visible operation was a decoy. The real control moved in the shadows. Rook had chosen the second threat. Miles exhaled slowly. He's watching his own people. Making sure no one deviates, Avery said. The realization settled heavily between them. This wasn't a man reacting to risk. This was a man managing assets. They withdrew before they could be seen, retreating the way they had come. Miles knew better than to test a perimeter he hadn't finished mapping. As they moved, Avery broke the silence. I reported something like this once. Miles glanced at her. To an agency liaison, she said. Federal, years ago. The investigator asked the right questions, then... nothing. Miles stopped walking. What was her name? Avery thought for a moment. Priya Desai. Miles nodded slowly. I've heard of her, he said. HSI, she doesn't drop cases. Avery's eyes narrowed. Then why did this one go cold? Because she was missing something, Miles replied. Or someone. They reached a stand of trees that overlooked the co-op one last time. Lights flickered below. Engines idled. System ran smoothly, too smoothly. Avery folded her arms against the cold. If I go back, she said, he'll assume I've broken. Miles watched the compound, eyes hard. If he's patient enough to wait, he said, he's patient enough to believe that. Avery looked at him. You're talking like this is already a plan. Miles didn't look away. If he wants you to return, he said slowly, then this place isn't where people disappear. Avery's breath caught. Then what is it? Miles turned toward the forest, toward the road that led away from the lights. It's where they prepare, he said, not where they finish. Rook stood between them and the co-op, body squared, gaze unwavering. The snow kept falling, and somewhere nearby, a man who believed silence could be reclaimed was watching, unblinking. The winter festival made Silver Pine look harmless. Strings of warm lights crisscrossed the main square, glowing against fresh snow like constellations drawn too close to the ground. Booths lined the street, cider steaming in paper cups, wood smoke curling from iron braziers, children skating in looping, unsteady circles while parents laughed and pretended not to worry. Music drifted from a small stage, a fiddle bright enough to make the cold feel temporary. Miles hated how normal it looked. He stood near the edge of the square with a knit cap pulled low, shoulders hunched like any other visitor warding off the cold. The digital camera in his jacket pocket was small, silent, and already recording. He kept his breathing slow, eyes moving without lingering. A man trained to read chaos learned quickly how to read crowds, too. The way people clustered, the spaces they avoided, the lines of sight that mattered. Avery moved through the festival as if she belonged there. She wore the volunteer vest over her jacket, reflective strips dulled by wear, a red cross patch sewn slightly crooked at the chest. Her hair was tucked under a beanie, her posture relaxed, her hands busy, passing cups of water, kneeling to check a skinned knee, smiling at strangers who saw only a medic doing what medics did. She looked smaller like this, less armored. But Miles knew better. Her eyes never stopped counting. Rook ranged close, not leashed, not obvious. His black and tan coat blended into shadow between stalls, his movement fluid, purposeful. 5 years old, disciplined, steady. He avoided children without being told, curved his path around sudden motion, his focus always returning to Avery's position and the narrow service road that cut behind the square toward the docks. Grant had chosen this day carefully. Miles felt it in the way the crowd pressed inward, in the way security relaxed without admitting it. Festivals dulled edges. People smiled at trucks they would have questioned yesterday. A white transport rolled in just after noon. Clean, branded, legitimate enough to earn a nod from volunteers directing traffic. It eased toward the temporary loading zone behind the stage, where generators hummed and cables snaked across the snow. Miles's jaw tightened. He shifted his angle, camera catching the truck's plates, the logo, the driver's hand steady on the wheel. Avery glanced his way once, just a flicker, then turned back to a woman complaining about cold fingers. 30 seconds. That was all it took for a plan to slip. The first thing that went wrong wasn't the truck. It was a man. He stumbled out of the crowd near the loading zone, middle-aged, bundled too tight, his breath shallow and fast. Panic sat on him like a weight. He collided with Avery as she knelt to zip a child's coat. He gasped. I can't. Avery was already on her feet, hands at his elbows, eyes assessing. Hey, she said gently. Slow. Breathe. With me. Miles felt the shift immediately. The line Avery had planned to hold collapsed inward. The loading zone filled. A knot of people formed where space had been clear. The clock inside Miles's head started counting backward. Avery guided the man to a bench, her voice steady. You're okay. Look at me. She could have waved someone else over. She didn't. Rook's ears snapped forward. The dog pivoted, positioning himself between Avery and the truck. Body angled, not blocking, not charging, just enough to change how anyone approaching would have to move. Miles adjusted, stepping closer to the generators, camera steady. He caught the driver's door opening. A second man stepped down, tall, shoulders squared, coat cut too clean for the cold. Grant Halverson did not rush. He moved with the calm of a man who believed the world would accommodate him. Mid-40s, tall without bulk, short beard trimmed with precision, hair dark and threaded with gray, combed back like order mattered. His eyes scanned the square without lingering, measuring reactions rather than faces. He saw Avery. Something like relief crossed his face. Brief, controlled. Miles's pulse slowed. Grant crossed the snow, hands visible, posture non-threatening. He knelt beside Avery as if summoned by coincidence. Rough day, Grant said warmly, voice carrying just enough to reassure the onlookers. You doing okay? Avery didn't look at him. She finished checking the man's vitals, then straightened. I've got him, she said. Someone call EMS. Grant's smile didn't change. His eyes flicked once to the truck, then to Rook. The dog held his ground. Grant's gaze returned to Avery, softening. You didn't come back, he said quietly. I was worried. Miles felt the crowd press in another step. This was the moment. Avery stood, meeting Grant's eyes. Her voice was even. I needed time. Grant nodded, as if that answered something. We all do. He reached into his coat. Not fast, not threatening. Rook moved. The German shepherd stepped forward, placing his body between Grant and Avery, shoulders squared, eyes locked. A low sound vibrated in his chest, controlled and unmistakable. Grant froze. His hand stopped. The crowd murmured, confusion rippling outward. Miles moved at the same instant, closing the distance, camera lifted, capturing Grant's face, the truck, the plates, the logo. He saw Grant's jaw tighten, just a fraction. 30 seconds late. The driver bolted. He shoved past a volunteer, sprinting for the cab. Rook reacted, but not the way Miles expected. The dog did not chase. He pivoted back to Avery. A child darted into the open space, chasing a dropped mitten, skidding on the snow toward the truck's blind spot. Avery saw it at the same time Grant did. She moved without thinking, She lunged, grabbing the child's jacket, pulling him back hard as the truck lurched forward. The crowd screamed. Miles felt the planned fracture in his hands. He could hold the camera steady, or he could move. Grant chose for him. Grant shoved Avery aside and ran. Miles tackled him from the side, driving them both into the snow. Grant was strong, trained strong, fighting with efficient bursts, trying to reach inside his coat. Rook launched. The crack of the gunshot sounded like ice breaking. Pain exploded along Rook's shoulder as the round grazed him, tearing fur and skin, but missing bone. The dog yelped once, sharp, surprised, then slammed his weight into Grant, jaws clamping onto the man's sleeve, dragging him down. Miles felt Grant's resistance falter. He drove a forearm across Grant's chest, pinning him, hand wrenching the weapon free and flinging it into the snow. Grant bucked, snarling, reaching for a hidden blade. Rook repositioned, placing his body squarely between Grant and Avery, stance wide, unyielding. Blood darkened his fur, steam rising where heat met cold. "Down!" Miles barked. Rook did not retreat. He held. Grant laughed once, breathless and bitter. "You chose the dog," he spat. Miles tightened his grip. "I chose the truth." Sirens cut through the square, too close to be coincidence now. Blue lights washed over the snow, people scattered. Officers poured in, weapons trained, commands sharp and practiced. Grant went still. Cuffs clicked. The driver was tackled at the cab. The truck's doors were cut open. Cameras rolled. Miles dropped to his knees beside Rook. The dog stood, barely, then sagged, weight shifting awkwardly as his injured shoulder gave. He lowered himself to the snow, chest heaving, eyes bright and fixed on Miles's face. "It's okay," Miles said, hands gentle, voice steady despite the tremor he couldn't hide. "I've got you." Rook's tail thumped once. Then his head rested against the snow. Federal vehicles arrived without ceremony. No sirens, no speeches, just the quiet efficiency of people who had waited long enough to be certain. Agents moved through the square with practiced calm, sealing off access points, cataloging faces, collecting phones that had already captured too much and yet not enough. The festival lights stayed on, blinking patiently, as if unaware that something permanent had just shifted beneath them. Grant Halverson was led away in cuffs. Up close, he looked smaller than he had in the open square. Still composed, still neat, short beard trimmed, coat brushed free of snow. But his eyes no longer searched for control. They measured consequence instead. He said nothing as agents guided him toward a black SUV. His posture erect, his mouth set in a line that suggested calculation rather than regret. Miles watched until the door closed. Behind Grant, the work continued. The white transport was impounded. Plates photographed. Compartments opened. Paperwork collected in sealed bags. It was not a clean ending. Miles knew that. But it was an opening wide enough to matter. Rook lay on a stretcher near the edge of the square. The German shepherd's breathing was steady now. The rise and fall of his chest slow and controlled beneath a thermal blanket. Blood had been cleaned from his shoulder. The wound dressed carefully by paramedics, who spoke to him the way professionals spoke to patients who understood more than they could say. 5 years old, strong, still alert. When Miles knelt beside him, Rook's eyes found his immediately. "You did good," Miles said softly. Rook's tail thumped once beneath the blanket. Avery stood a few steps back, arms folded tight against the cold and against herself. Her volunteer vest was gone. In its place, she wore her jacket, stained and torn. The weight of the day etched into the set of her shoulders. She watched the agents work without flinching. "They'll ask me everything," she said quietly. "And they should," Miles nodded. They will. She glanced at him. You won't tell me to run? No, he said. I won't. Avery's mouth tightened, not with fear, but resolve. I signed those manifests, she said. I'll answer for that. Miles studied her face, the exhaustion, the clarity. That's the difference, he said. You didn't disappear when it mattered. Avery exhaled, a breath she seemed to have been holding for months. Neither did you. They moved Rook to a small clinic on the edge of town, the kind that served sled dogs and ranch animals more often than canines with service scars. The veterinarian, a compact woman in her 40s with weathered hands and kind eyes, worked methodically, explaining every step as if Rook were listening. Maybe he was. The bullet grazed muscle, she said. No bone, no nerve. But there will be stiffness, hesitation. Miles felt the word land. Hesitation? He repeated. The vet nodded. Pain teaches caution. That's not a flaw. Rook's ears twitched. He'll recover, she added. But he may pause before he commits. Give him time. Miles rested a hand on Rook's neck, feeling the warmth, the life beneath the fur. You hear that, buddy? He murmured. Rook's eyes stayed on him, steady and intent. 2 days later, the snow began to melt. It came slowly at first. Thin rivulets along the curb, dark patches spreading beneath parked cars. Then all at once, the way winter always pretended it wouldn't. The lake softened at the edges, ice cracking in quiet, irregular lines that sounded like distant breathing. Miles walked Rook along the same path by the shoreline. The leash was loose. Always loose. Rook moved well, favoring his shoulder only slightly, the stiffness easing with each step. He sniffed the air, tail level, ears alert. The world smelled different now. Wet earth replacing cold metal, pine sap seeping into thaw. They reached the place where ice met reeds. Rook learned the ground again. And then he stopped. Not abruptly, not rigid, just a pause. Miles's chest tightened. For a split second, the old reflex surged. Pull back. Don't choose. Don't decide. The memory of the blast, the handler's eyes, the soundless lift of the ground threatened to take hold. Rook glanced back at him, not questioning, waiting. Miles swallowed. He did not pull the leash. He did not freeze. Forward, he said. The word was calm, certain, earned. Rook stepped forward, no hesitation. The ice did not give. The days that followed were quieter. Federal briefings replaced rumor. The co-op was shut down pending investigation. Charges were filed, not all of them, not enough to name every hand that had moved in shadow, but enough to fracture the structure that had relied on silence. Avery testified. She did not soften the truth. She did not decorate it. She spoke plainly about what she had seen, what she had signed, and why. When asked why she hadn't come forward sooner, she did not offer excuses. I was afraid, she said, and I was wrong. Some people nodded. Others did not. She accepted that too. Miles was interviewed twice, once as a witness, once as a footnote. He offered his footage, his notes, his roots. He did not ask for credit. He did not ask to disappear. Rook healed. Not completely, not perfectly. The vet was right. There were moments when he slowed before committing, when the memory of pain rose like a hand against his chest. But when Miles spoke, Rook listened. When Miles decided, Rook followed. They learned each other again. Spring arrived reluctantly. Then, all at once, the festival lights came down. The docks reopened. Boats returned to water that no longer pretended not to know what it had held. Miles stood with Avery on the ridge one morning, watching the lake release its grip. "They won't get everyone," Avery said. "No," Miles replied. "But they won't forget this either." She studied him. "What will you do now?" Miles looked at Rook, who was sniffing the new grass near the path, curious and careful, tail wagging faintly. "I'll stay," he said. "For a while." Avery nodded. "Me too." They didn't make promises. They didn't name anything. Some connections didn't need language. The last morning came bright and quiet. Miles and Rook walked the shoreline once more, the ice broken into drifting plates that clicked softly against each other like glass chimes. The air smelled of thaw and possibility. Rook slowed. He stopped. Miles felt the pause, but it did not own him. He looked ahead, read the wind, the water, the dog beside him. "Go," he said. Rook moved. The camera would have cut to black right there, and the world, unseen, would have continued. Imperfect, watchful, and just a little more awake. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or blinding light. Sometimes they come quietly, through a loyal dog that refuses to move, through a conscience that refuses to stay silent, through a moment when someone finally chooses what is right instead of what is easy. God does not always remove the storm, but He often places the right souls on the same path, at the exact moment when a choice must be made. In our daily lives, we may not face frozen lakes or hidden enemies, but we all encounter moments of hesitation, moments when we sense something is wrong and must decide whether to look away or to act. May we learn to listen more closely, to trust the signs placed before us, to protect the innocent, even when it costs us comfort. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of courage, loyalty, and faith. May God bless you, watch over your loved ones, and guide you safely through every storm you face.